the table. So anybody have any comment?
Chair, move to approve.
Thank you. Do we need a second?
Okay, yes, please. You have a second?
We have a second. So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion passes. So item number 3, the Transportation Improvement Program TIP development process update. Mr. Brown, you have an update?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It's good to be with you. Happy Halloween. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on the TIP development process for fiscal years 24 through 28. As many of you are aware, the TIP is a prioritized listing or program of transportation projects that's developed and formally approved by the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the region, which is PAG. The PAG TIP covers 5 years and must be updated at least every 4 years. PAG updates its TIP biennially. The TIP is federally required and aligns with PAG's long-range transportation plan, the regional mobility and accessibility plan. In terms of TIP requirements, it must be multimodal, including roadway, bicycle, pedestrian, transit, and other transportation modes. It must also be financially or fiscally constrained, so we do not program more funds than can be reasonably expected each year by fund source. So to kick off our process, we issue a notice of funding availability, which we did in August. And highlights from that notebook include introduction and key points, programming priorities, funding availability and staff contacts, a schedule of key milestones, information on eligibility and available funding, and resources. So this slide is a graphic that illustrates that it's about a 10-month process from beginning to end to develop our TIP. So we kick it off in August, as I mentioned. The first third of the process is really interacting with our committees to look at the projects in the current TIP. We discuss the revenue projections for the next several fiscal years, and then we start to develop the draft project list for the next TIP. So in the middle third, we review those lists with the committees. We start our internal technical work, including our modeling, our GIS mapping, et cetera, so that we can formally take those lists to you in the spring for approval with the full document. And we also, in the spring, we kick off our public engagement process with open houses to discuss TIP projects. And then in April, we have a 30-day public comment period that commences. And then finally, we have a public hearing and approval by regional council in late May. So these next 2 slides go into more detail about those steps. We talked about August with the kickoff and the NOFA distribution. Next month, we'd like to meet with our TIP subcommittee to review the projects in the current TIP and then talk about revenue projections. From November to January, we'd like the TPC to review the draft project lists. In December, we'll begin our technical work, as I mentioned. In January, the management, this committee, as well as regional council, will review the available draft project lists. In February, we hope to have assembled a full comprehensive list of projects that's developed and through our TIP database. So it's a unified list. In March, we anticipate having the preliminary draft full document completed for the TIP open houses. In March, we also will be busy in March. We will ask the management committee and the regional council to review the full draft project list I just mentioned. We'll also hold those open houses with the public. In April, we'll ask the Transportation and Planning Committee to review and recommend approval of the final draft TIP document and commence that 30-day public hearing process, comment period process. In May, we'll ask the Management Committee to recommend approval of the final draft TIP. In May, we'll conclude the 30-day public hearing comment period, document comments, and have the public hearing. That will be followed by a request for regional council to approve the fiscal year 2024 to 2028 TIP. So this process is very similar to previous processes, 10-month process. But with each TIP cycle, there are some differences. We have new transportation bills. We may be in a different situation with the RTA, and this cycle is no different. So some important considerations for this TIP development cycle. Programming of regional funds must continue to prioritize the delivery of RTA projects. So this commitment is in place until further direction by the RTA board. At the January 2026 meeting of the regional council, there was a motion that included several items, one of which states that the regional council will provide official board positions for identifying a proposed plan and funding to complete the projects as part of the original RTA plan, and define the specifics of how to address any RTA projects that are moved into RTA next. So for the TIP development process, regional funds available in fiscal years 2027 and 2028 will remain in program until the RTA board determines how to program those regional funds. Also, the RTA budget is adopted annually by the RTA board for the following fiscal year. So in June, the RTA board adopted the fiscal year 2023 RTA budget. It's important to note that the RTA funds will be programmed at the board's sole discretion. Like the last TIP development cycle, funding sources for the programming on new projects will be limited to FTA sources as described in the note file. So these are for new projects. The transit working group will serve and is serving as the selection panel for transit projects. They've been busy and they've already reviewed project applications. At their meeting earlier this month, they actually took action and approved the financially constrained table of project funding requests. So the next step for that list is to take it to the TPC. That, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you again for your time this morning. Happy to.
That one, that first bullet point says that until the RTA board determines how to program those regional funds. Is the RTA board the one that makes that decision, or is that the PAG regional council?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I think it will be the RTA board that's going to be determining how to program those regional funds. I believe that policy that's in place was put in place by the RTA board to direct PERF 12.6 and regional STBG to meet the commitments for the RTA projects. But I could be mistaken, Mr. McKean.
I guess just to add to that, the motion that was made by the regional council authorizing the RTA board to make that determination. At least that's our take.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes.
So I just, the reason I ask is because those are two different entities. And so my hesitation is just seeing the RTA board. The RTA board has the authority to do that because the PAG council has given them the authority.
PAG Regional Council made the motion back in January, and that's our determination that based on that motion, RTA can make a recommendation.
RTA board can make a recommendation to who?
The regional council.
Council. Okay, all right. Because when I see that, it makes me nervous as to who's got the authority to do that ultimately.
Yeah, we'll make sure we'll cross the T's, dot the I's. I understand what your question is, but we're relying on the PAG Regional Council's motion from January that indicated that a direction needs to come from RTA board.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 4. It's a regional mobility and accessibility plan, the RMAP update. Ms. Renee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Management Committee. My name is Jeanette DeVren. I'm a Transportation Planning Administrator, and I oversee the PAG Long Range Plan. I'm here today to give some updates on the development of the 2055 Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan. So I'll refer to it as the RMAP, as you're probably familiar. We've been in front of this committee several times in the past to talk about the development of our last 2045 plan, and here we are halfway through the timeframe to develop the new update. As you know, the long range plan is a federally required document that must be updated every 4 years. The last update was approved in September of 2020, so here we are halfway through to 2024. Well, when we plan on bringing the next version to the group. We're currently developing the foundation materials for that 2055 plan, and it will have a 30-year planning horizon. The last update of the regional mobility and accessibility plan, like I said, was from September of 2020, and we really focused on updating the technical elements of that document. So we focused on the demographic data, the project list, updating our revenue, and developing the performance report. So for the 2055 plan, we are going to more extensively be updating the data that goes into the plan, revisions to the project list. We're going to be reevaluating the finance plan and the methodology and assumptions that go into building the finance plan. And we're going to also conduct a more extensive public outreach. One of the main points to make right there is the project list. So when we did the last plan and we updated the project list, we left a lot of projects in the plan just because we didn't have the opportunity to go out to the public to really take a deep dive into the project list. So this go around, we're going to do that and make sure that that project list is really cleaned up. The 2055 plan, like I said, has been in development really since the day we approved the last version. And more specifically, we've been working behind the scenes to update that existing conditions information. We've been updating the data that feeds into our land use plan, our land use model, our ABM, which is our activity-based modeling. We've been tracking performance and reporting on progress towards our performance targets. We've been building the RMAP Project Explorer, which is the portal where our TPC staff members have been going in and adding project information. We've been tracking federal requirements for long-range transportation planning, as well as preparing for new federal funding. We're updating the finance plan and working towards that fiscally constrained number. Looking forward, we will be getting the existing conditions and base information together for the foundation of the plan, really from the for the modeling piece, which includes our population projections, which ironically, one of the things I learned when I first took on this project is how much that population projection plays into the development of the plan. We anticipate getting those numbers from the state in December, and we'll also be updating our employment projections. That data, as well as our existing land use, general plans, known projects, active projects would be like active plats that are currently seeing some development, and redevelopment areas all feed into building that land use model. Those inputs are used to model current and future traffic demand. As I briefly mentioned, the finance plan, the PAG team's begun working on the finance plan, which is not only a required element, but it's the basis of that fiscal constraint. So similar to Jamie and the TIP, the RMAP has to be a fiscally constrained document. So what that means is that it must be based off of a reasonable expectation of funding. So our project list has to stay within a reasonable expectation for how much money we will have in the next 30 years. And as you can imagine, that's a daunting task, but it really is important that, you know, we update this plan every 4 years. So we're reevaluating those numbers, reevaluating project costs. So we meet that federal requirement, but it also takes a really deep look into how much money we think is coming in and how much those projects are going to cost. And it also helps us to really think and evaluate what our needs really are. So instead of just putting forward a pie in the sky, these are all the ones of the region, we have to really think about what's doable and what's accomplishable and what's for the best for the region. We are developing the methodology for the finance plan and bringing those assumptions through the TPC for validation. We've presented the methodology for federal and state funding, and we'll begin to bring the assumptions for local funds to TPC starting in November, which is tomorrow. I can't believe it's already here. We've begun updating the project list. So we opened our project portal for our TPC members to go in and begin clearing out old completed projects, modifying existing projects, deleting projects that are no longer valid or desirable. And the next step will be to go in, open that Project Explorer once again, and add new projects. Throughout the process of leaving that Project Explorer open, the jurisdictions will have time to come back and reconsider the scope of those projects and the costs. So once we build that, we really clean it out and refine it and refine it and refine it until the point that we bring the document to the committee. I know that's important. It was in the last version because of the timing of project cost estimates. So we want to have the most recent information, but at the same time, like the beauty of having that 4-year cycle is that 2 years from approval, we're going to be looking at it again. So our next steps, we have transitioned our air quality modeling program from the EPA MOVES 2014B model, which probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you, but the EPA did release a new version called MOVES 3, and it estimates air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And so really what that means is we got an update and we were able to load that into our system here and run the model using that new platform. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's a process, and we've been able to put that in place. Our modeling team will probably be using that for the tip as well. So major improvement to how we do air quality modeling. Like I said, we're going to reopen that Project Explorer, start adding the new projects, and then come to an agreement on that fiscally constrained number. Last go around, I believe it was 15.7 billion. The prior RMAP was, I think, around 17.5, 17.2 billion. So we're drawing those numbers up, and hopefully we'll be bringing that number through committee soon. We'll also be folding in those population projections and that demographic information from the state, and then we'll begin our public outreach. We do have a project website up and running, so feel free to check it out. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
An overall timeline or plan?
It seems like there's a lot of moving parts. We just want to know what that TikTok looks like.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, there is. This project is one of those that stems on a lot of information that come out of other planning processes. So we're the umbrella project. So we really are in this state of fluctuation with our project schedule, mainly being responsive to all the effort that's happening at RTA Next. So we don't want to get out too far ahead of those efforts. But of course, we have this 4-year time frame. Really, the big chunk right now is this existing conditions, putting all the data together these past 2 years, and then we'll be developing a more detailed project timeline moving forward, probably the beginning of next year. So we'll have more details for you at that time. We also fold in a lot of work that's done at the tip level. So our project kind of adjusts because we have this big time frame, but we don't want to get out too far ahead.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? I do have one question. You made reference to project costs, and are the project costs that you're working into your database, are they reflective of the current trends in construction inflation? Because I've seen, at least on the stuff I'm working on right now, 40+% increase.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Yes, so when we developed the update to the Project Explorer, we incorporated factors to inflation. So an easy example would be drainage cost. We anticipate those being 20% more than they used to be. So there's different factors in there that we built into the project characteristics. So as the jurisdictions plugged in their numbers, they could use the old number and we could just adjust it, or they could manually enter what they think those project costs might be. So that's one of the reasons that we keep re-examining project costs throughout the process, up until the time we say go. I remember with the last document, we even pushed our project costs about 6 months further just to accommodate some cost estimates for RTA that were coming in, for that very reason, to make sure that we hit the nail on the head as best we could. But yeah, we're definitely keeping that in mind.
I don't want to speak for everybody else here, but I know I myself would be personally interested to see what those rates are.
Sure. we can get that
Just
to you.
because we're in the throes of these things right now, we have very current data.
Oh, good. Yeah, we can.
Just make sure it all balances out.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? This was informational item. Thank you.
Welcome.
Item number 5, new federal program funding opportunities. What's your last name, Mr. Zinda?
Correct. Yes,
Ah,
thank you,
all
Mr.
right.
Chair. So my name is David Zinda. I hope you like my Halloween costume as a policy analyst. It's very nice to be with you all. Today I'll provide an overview of many of the new and updated competitive grant programs made available under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So this list is long, so I'm just going to briefly cover these funding opportunities. Hopefully you find some information insightful, or at least a good forum for further discussion and review. Most of this information is going to be available on FHWA's website, where you'll find eligibilities, notice of funding opportunities, timelines, and so forth. So frequently these slides will say whether a program is funded by contract authority, guaranteed appropriations, or general fund authorizations. These distinctions are important as you review these various funding or these competitive programs, in particular because programs of contract authority and guaranteed appropriations are in a sense kind of real programs with real funding and do not need any additional action, as I understand, to be made available in the future. So programs with contract authority, guaranteed appropriations are ready to go pending a NOFO. General fund authorizations require subsequent action by the House Appropriations Committee through its annual appropriation cycle, so they may or may not really exist in a given year, and we'll see that with at least one of the programs today. So the first program is the carbon reduction program. This one is brand new with this new bill. I'll call it CRP, and it is a formulaic program, the only distinctly non-competitive funding program in this presentation. CRP is going to be sub-allocated in almost the exact same way as STVG. State gets a little bit, rest is going to MPOs throughout the state. There are several eligible uses for this program with the intention of reducing transportation emissions through various projects as well as planning activities. The state is to take the lead on developing a carbon reduction strategy, which is part of the requirements of this program, due no later than November 2023. So within the next year, and they'll be coordinating with the MPOs throughout the state to do just that. PAG is currently using CRP funding to promote planning activities that are eligible under federal law, such as commuter services, advanced transportation management technologies, and the like, which facilitate the reduction of emissions, of course. On to a PROTECT grant, standing for Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation. This is also a new program that has both a formulaic and competitive grant opportunity that funds both planning activities and projects related to infrastructure resiliency, related to climate risk. The formulaic portion of this program is going to be retained by ADOT and not distributed to us for further distribution to you all, unfortunately. However, there are several grants for which MPOs, cities, towns, counties, and tribes are eligible. So first, we're going to have resilience planning grants. And this is really to identify your vulnerable assets to risks such as flooding or fire, which of course we know is a risk here. Although it is not necessary, it is better to have a resilience plan in place, kind of identifying and inventorying those potential projects before seeking the latter two, the resilience improvement grants or community resilience grants, because the federal share can be increased if you already have a plan in place. And then you can see the latter two grants provide funding to build projects, whether it be strengthening the resilience of infrastructure to natural disasters, within the second bullet point, or establishing some kind of community evacuation route in the event of an emergency, the third bullet point. Next, we have rebuilding American infrastructure with sustainability and equity. This is the newest incarnation of the Build and formerly Tiger grant programs. And this is going to be kind of a family of 4 or so competitive grants we're going to cover, each with their own unique flavor. So this one you can see will provide up to $25 million available to modernize infrastructure and make systems safer, accessible, and sustainable. Congratulations, of course, to the city of Tucson, a big win for our region and getting that 22nd Street Bridge funded at the maximum grant amount. I believe the only project to do that in this round of grants. So let's see all the other member jurisdictions go for that 25 million over the next 4 years. And with that said, about 1.5 billion will be made available each year. Next, we have National Infrastructure Project Assistant Program, or the Mega Grant Program. So this one, it's kind of distinct flavor in this little family, is going to be for the largest and most complex projects that are going to be very difficult to fund. And the example here is the state recently applied for this funding to expand I-10 between Chandler and Casa Grande. I think at the tune of 400 million is what they asked for. But as you can see, funding amounts are the largest of just about all other programs that this one can provide. Next, we have nationally significant multimodal freight and highway projects, or the infra grant program. So the flavor of this program, once again, is focusing on freight compared to the last two with similar funding amounts, about 7.25 billion over 5 years. And the minimum and maximum amounts are going to vary. You'd have to refer to the notice of funding opportunity for more information on that one. The last grant program in this family is going to be the Rural Surface Transportation Grant Program. And like the infra grant program, it's really going to seek to improve connectivity, movement of people and freight, and economic development, but across rural areas. The minimum grant size here is going to be 25 million, and funds can be used for construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, and many more. There is going to be, as I understand in my reading, 10% set aside for smaller projects in case you don't have something that is going to meet that minimum 25 million threshold. As an MPO, PAG actually does not qualify for this grant. However, several local and tribal governments potentially can. The stipulation here is that projects should be outside of urbanized areas, not jurisdictional areas, with populations over 200,000. For our purposes, this presently excludes pretty much the city of Tucson, the southeast portion of Marana, that's very close to Tucson, most of Oro Valley, Catalina Foothills, Tanque Verde, Drexel Heights, Tucson Estates, you kind of get the picture in that big cluster. Other areas outside of this urbanized area, such as Saurita, Green Valley, Vail, Abra Valley, and other rural areas of Pima County do qualify. And I would encourage you to verify the eligibility if this is something you're interested in by looking at maps of the Tucson urbanized area to get a sense of where you can apply for this grant for projects. Okay, so those were kind of some of the older repackaged grant programs. Here are some new ones for us. Reconnecting Communities pilot program. This is a new program that provides funding to both planning and projects. The priority for this program is to restore community connectivity, whether that be removing existing infrastructure or otherwise mitigating the effects of transportation infrastructure that acts as a barrier to mobility, access, or economic development. Priority is explicitly given to communities that are considered economically disadvantaged. So this program is going to provide a minimum of about 100,000 and a maximum of 2 million for the planning side of things, and up to 100 million for construction grants. And next we have Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, another new competitive grant program for our Vision Zero grants. There is both a planning and project activity again with this one, and funding may be used for planning activities via the Action Plan grant, which is one kind of area that they encourage you to develop to eliminate fatalities and analyze crash location and community input data, among other things, and mechanisms for the evaluation of outcomes. And then projects can be carried out with funds as well under what they call the implementation grants to kind of bring to life those projects that were identified in the action plan. About 1 billion is going to be available each year and guaranteed appropriations for this program. Also, another new pilot program is going to be the Wildlife Crossing Safety Pilot. This is going to give about 70 million per year to support projects which reduce the number of wildlife vehicle collisions. Priority is really going to be given to rural areas. As you can see, about 60% of the funds were slated for that. Healthy Streets program is another one that's new. And, I look at Tucson and I kind of get a little personally excited about this one, right? Designed to mitigate urban heat islands, among other things, through the use of cool pavement and tree cover. Up to 15 million can be awarded for a single project. However, this funding does not actually exist this year. Spending was authorized from the general fund, but I don't think it received actual cash from the appropriations process. So we'll keep an eye out for those notice of funding opportunities should it happen in the future. There are several technology related programs as well. First, PAG is eligible to incorporate new data-driven approaches to project prioritization in the TIP with the first new program. There's also the Accelerated Innovation Deployment Demonstration program. Mouthful there, supports a pilot of innovation projects. Recently, as an example, Maricopa Association of Governments received funding under this program for the SunCloud data portal, of which PAG is a partner. We also have the ATTAIN program to provide grants to eligible entities to deploy, install, and operate advanced technological transportation systems to improve safety, mobility, efficiency, system performance, connectivity, and infrastructure return on investment. We also have SMART grants, which are the reincarnation of the last Smart Cities Challenge. Funding was authorized from the general fund for this one and now has actual cash via that appropriations process. There is a notice of funding opportunity out for this one that is due on the 18th of November this year. So National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure has both a formulaic component, which is largely going to be in the hands of the state, and competitive grants. Of the competitive grants, one can apply for either the Community Charging Program, which provides funding to low and moderate income communities, or the Corridor Charging along an alternative fuel corridor, each with about a little over $1 billion over the 5 years. There are going to be several tribal grants that our tribal members can apply for as well. First, there's a safety fund, which provides funding to reduce transportation-related injuries and fatalities on tribal lands, and that link there will take you to more details about what's eligible and what needs to be included in the application. We also have funding for nationally significant federal lands and tribal projects, which provide, in quotes, substantial benefits to tribal communities. It can mean several things. Tribal High Priority Projects Program helps fill in the gap for priority projects for which there are insufficient funds to complete. And this would include infrastructure compromised by emergency or disaster. As you're probably already well aware at this point, there also exists competitive funding for bridges in fair or poor condition, which you may have already investigated. And of all these, I know we went through them very fast. This website has the entire list of everything I've gone through today with nice charts showing funding amounts, due dates, and whatnot, and also has links, if they are available, to the notice of funding opportunities. So I encourage you to check those out if you're interested for more information. That concludes my presentation, unless there are any questions on this one.
Mr. Chair, quick question.
Oh, Mr. Dill.
Dr. Dilly.
I'm too new to say that.
Was that you, Terry?
That was Mike, actually.
Yeah. Just a quick question. David, thanks for the presentation. Is this PowerPoint included in the packet material? Or can it be sent to us?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair, Mr. Dilly, members of the committee. It's not in this incarnation of the packet, but I'm sure we can send it out upon request.
I would appreciate it. I looked through the packet and I didn't see it, but it has a lot of great information. So thanks.
Yeah, if you would, please send it to the entire committee.
Just for your information, typically all the material are included in the next meeting packet, so you'll have access to it, but we'll email it to you ahead of time.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Good. This is informational, so no action. Mr. Zinda, you're up again. This is for the region-wide highway user revenue fund FERF report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Good to be back with you once again. So let's talk about HERF. Here's just a couple of observations from the latest report that I put together. Unfortunately, it is maybe a little bit dated at this point, just goes, it contains July and August numbers. However, as of August 2022, we're seeing a regional total of about 28 million in HERF. So this would include what shows up on the PAG accounts, HERF 12.6 or 2.6, as well as what is showing up directly to your jurisdictions. Compared to fiscal year 2022, this is down about 3.45%, but 5-year average still looking healthy, up about 7.5%. In terms of HERF 12.6, what PAG directly receives, we are looking pretty good as of August. We have taken in about 4.8 million compared to what ADOT had projected last year for this fiscal year. That is up 1.65%. Compared to fiscal year 2022, that is up 7.49%. So even though the total amount of region-wide HERF appears to be down, the PAG HERF 12.6, and as you'll see here in a second, 2.6 are up. So it's member jurisdictions among us who seem to be getting a little bit lower HERF. HERF 2.6 also kind of follows the trends of 12.6. As of August, we had taken a little bit over $1 million. That's up 3.42% than what ADOT would have forecasted last year for this point in the year, and about 9% over the actuals received from the previous fiscal year. Concerning HERF 12.6, our balance currently as of August 2022 on the PAG ledgers is 49 million. That's a year-over-year increase of 40%. Gasoline sales tend to look normal compared to average historical metrics, perhaps just a little bit under, but nothing I think we need to be worried about. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
On table 4, when you said you're year-over-year 40% up, what do you attribute that to? What do you attribute the increase of 40%?
Yes, thank you for your question, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Ortega. This would be HERF 12.6 or on our accounts, some of which, well, probably most of which honestly has been programmed or slated to projects, but for which projects have not billed to quite yet.
It's the follow-up question. So if I look at table 3, table 2, the actual revenues are only up about 2%, just year over year.
That is correct.
Ms. Lesher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Continuing to milk new person status, my question is, I believe the tip now is, I'm looking at table 2, which shows about 28 million. And I think the tip plan is now programmed for the year at about 22 million. How do we realign those, readjust those as the year goes by?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Ms. Lesher, thank you for your question. I think that will chiefly happen as we develop the new tip. We will have our new revenue forecast, which come directly from ADOT, and we'll be able to program those funds accordingly and also look and see if there's any excess HERF. We will account for that, and we'll probably put it towards our transportation program as well.
Any other questions? I do have one. Mr. Zinda, as car companies are cycling out their gasoline engine cars and they're going to purely electric, has that been factored into the future HERF projections?
Yes, thank you for your question, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. One would have to review the ADOT's risk analysis panel for exact specifications, but according to my memory, and this is freely available on their website, I don't believe that they explicitly account for that among other things, but I would need to review that report in a little bit more detail to be 100% certain.
I would ask that we do, because again, many manufacturers are just, we're not going to have the same gas tax in the future that we have today. And that's a concern.
Just to add to that, the conversation is taking place at the federal level as well as state level. So there's a lot of information out there. Ultimately, it's a policy decision. So as soon as we see any policy movement on that, we'll make sure we'll bring it back and report to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Anybody else? Anything? This was informational and also our adjournment. Thank you.
Thank you, and we do have a quorum, and Mr. Chair, if you want to start the RTA TMC meeting, we're good to go.
Why don't we take about a 5-minute break and then we'll come back at 9:45, ready to roll. Members a chance to come up with. I am the reason that I suggested maybe rescheduling the previous meetings. And I wanted to take just a quick minute to suggest to you to think about something. Number one, I think it's important that going forward with the RTA next and some of the conversations that we're having, that we are tasked with really reviewing and making recommendations ultimately to the RTA board. It came to my attention that 4 of us were going to be gone the last meeting that was scheduled, and we're going to send alternates. Love the alternates. I sent one back on the 10th. But I think if we can't be here, that we may want to just say that, and then we'll find a time when everybody can. I think it's important enough for us to be flexible in terms of, everybody's got other commitments, and I think there's opportunities. So I wanted to just say thank you to all and let you know that I was the reason that we're here on Halloween. Right? So with that, we'll go on to item 2, approval of the TMC meeting summary for August 10th. Do I have a motion for approval of that?
Mr. Chair, this is Shane. I'll motion, but I'll also note that nobody's in costume. Except me.
We are all in costume,
Yeah.
Mr. Dooley, but we'll take that motion and I'll call for a second. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Any comments on the meeting summary from August 10th?
Mr. Chair, I don't have a comment. because
Dr. Lewis.
I haven't had an opportunity yet to review the minutes with the video from the last meeting. So when it comes to the vote, I'm going to abstain, and that's the reason why.
Would you like to table these until you've had that opportunity? Has everybody else had an opportunity to review them? If it's just you? And
I
you can
don't think it's
abstain?
that important, Mr. Chair, to table it.
All right. Then with that, I would call for the motion to be voted upon, which is approval of minutes for August 10th. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I do have a question for the staff. Will we get minutes for the retreat or the day away? We get some.
There's a summary report in this packet. That's all we have.
I would suggest that because of the importance of that maybe we vote on that separately. My suggestion, because it is a formal meeting of the TMC, my suggestion would be that.
It's up to you. I'm not sure if it's agendized that way, but it's up
So
to
I
you.
would suggest in the future, bring it as an agenda item. That's my suggestion.
Sure.
So that we can certainly look at the summary there and make whatever modifications that might be necessary. I think it's an important enough meeting for us to have it on the record that we looked at the summary. So without objection, maybe at the next meeting, you bring a summary of that meeting. It was the 22nd September, but whatever the date was last year, it feels like. So we'll keep moving. So thank you all for that. On item 3, an updated RTA revenue estimate, Mr. Dignity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA Technical Management Committee. As you all know, we periodically do updates on our revenue forecasts, and with the recent volatility in our economy associated with COVID and a variety of other things, we have increased the frequency of that. We use the University of Arizona's Eller College of Management's Economic Business and Research Center to do the work. Mr. George Hammond has been the author of these reports over the past several years, and we have used them consistently since the inception of the RTA. In fact, they've generated the initial revenue forecast when Marshall Best was there. What I'm showing you right now is a comparison of the various forecasts that we've had. If you look at the bar chart here, the bar to the most prominent bar is the orange bar. That was the forecast that was done in nominal dollars associated with the original RTA plan in 2006. To the left of that bar is a blue bar, and that represents our actuals. The only time we really came close to that was in our second year, 2008. The first year, we had 2 months of of revenue that we did not receive while we were awaiting our first payments. We operate on a cash basis. So that's why the first year was off of the original forecast. The second year was fairly close, but then we hit the Great Recession. And as you can see, there's a tremendous departure from there. I know we've had some questions raised, not by this committee, but out in the general public as to why we were so far off. And I'm going to attempt to address that to some extent with this presentation. But the real message here is that we had a big change in our economy with the Great Recession. One of the things that we've definitely seen a difference in is our population. This graph shows our actual population. Those are the blue bars to the left of each of them. And then what I'm looking at is the different regional transportation forecasts. We had first the RTP and then the RMAP. And I had the opportunity to go back and look at our traffic, or rather our population projections going back into the 40s. And with each of these major updates, we have been consistently underestimating our population 20 years out. That happened consistently through the 60s and 70s, the 80s, 90s. Then with this most recent series, basically since the RTA began, we've deviated substantially. We've overestimated our population's estimates. And that was recognized by our POPTAC committee, and we began changing those estimates. So if you look into the future, so for instance, our 2025 plan forecast is the bright orange bar. You can see it quite a bit higher than the other succeeding bars. And in fact, that 2025 forecast was contemporary with when we were doing the RTA plan, the initial plan. The 2030 forecast, which was adopted slightly after the RTA was voted on, shows a little bit lower numbers, but then we see some significant differences as we look further into the future and we look at the effects of the Great Recession. So kind of our pre-recession trajectory was about 2.5% annual growth. And that was, if you look back in time, that was pretty consistent with what we had seen prior to that. So it was a straight line growth forecast. And that was what informed the RTA revenue plan, or the revenue estimates. With the Great Recession, and even before that, with the subprime mortgage failures, we began to see a difference. And our growth rate fell off considerably following that. We had a sea change with the growth rate in our region. And you can see now the post-recession growth trajectory. And what that means to us in terms of we start questioning why our revenues are substantially under what had been projected back in 2006. A lot of it has to do with the fact that there are 300,000 taxpayers that didn't show up at the end of the plan. So that's we were looking at a roughly 1.4 million people in the Tucson region at the end of the RTA plan, and will probably be about 1.1 million is our estimate at this point. So anyway, wanted to also show you what things have looked like in terms of our revenue growth. This is year to year since inception. Our first year we collected $60.5 million. Again, that was short in part because there's 2 months of revenue that we didn't receive. The 2008 revenue was about 75 million. I think we were estimating at about 78 million. So it was fairly close. But then we saw this huge drop off. We had anticipated a steady growth rate. And in fact, we saw some pretty substantial declines. And then when we had expected our bounce back, which has been typical in most recessions, you see a recovery that's fairly robust. We certainly didn't see that. And in fact, if you look through the middle of this most recent decade, we were in the sub 2% growth rate for many years. only really turning around in fiscal year 2018, and then we hit the recession. And I highlighted the year prior, or circled the year prior to the recession, the first year of the recession, 3.6% revenue growth, and then the growth since then, which has been fairly significant, and in part informed or as a result of increased wages and increased inflation, which has triggered the raises. So looking at our 2022 updated revenue estimate, we're looking out 30 years plus in terms of what's likely to happen in our tax base and how it'll impact our revenue. It's done by the U of A as a part of their regional forecasting program that they do every year. They do it statewide. They look at the two major markets, and then we ask them to drill down into what it means to us for the RTA. And that again is done using IHS market information, as well as other information data sources collected by Eller, and then they produce this forecast for us. We have asked them to provide us three different ranges, if you will: a baseline forecast, an optimistic forecast, and a pessimistic forecast, so we can kind of look at the bookends of what we might reasonably expect. When they're done in nominal dollars or year of collection dollars, including inflation. So it's informed by what they predict the inflation rates will be going out in the future. And then we deflate those down to whatever year we'd like. And in this case, we selected initially that we would deflate it to $2024 because we felt that would be useful in informing the RTA next discussions. But we also asked them to do a 2022 deflation as well, so we could look at what it means to us in the short term. And the estimates do acknowledge that there is post-pandemic economic recovery, what's happened since then, and more importantly, the potential for a near-term recession. So that's included in the pessimistic forecast. We are looking at a significant increase from the revenue estimate we did just last year, as we've been in the pandemic period, post-pandemic period. I guess we can call it post now. We've been doing a more frequent estimate, and U of A does it once a year. We've been following immediately after that U of A product is developed for the state. The optimistic scenario assumes stronger growth in both the short and long term that are envisioned in the baseline. The baseline scenario is the best guess forecast, if you will, that they have for what would be happening based upon current trends. And then we have a pessimistic scenario, which assumes a U.S. recession in the near term and higher inflation in the longer term. So I'm going to bore you to death with graphs now for a few minutes. The first one is looking at the tax base. What are we, the spending that's occurring that's taxable within the region, and this is in year of collection or nominal dollars. Our tax base, as a result of the Great Recession, declined about almost 20%. And it's been a slow slog coming back in. This is in nominal dollars. We only really returned to pre-recession levels in 2018 in terms of the dollars collected. But what you don't see is what it looked like if you'd adjusted for inflation. And again, these are all adjusted to 2024, so it's a future, but it shows the relative relationship or shows the relationship between the inflation adjusted tax base changes. And you can see that only recently have we reached where we're on an inflation adjusted basis to where we had been back in 2008 pre-recession. So it's been a long recovery only as a result of the recent spur of economic growth that we've seen. If you look at it on a per capita base, though, I mean, we haven't factored that prior graph was relative to the total tax base. We've added population since 2008. If you do a per capita adjustment, we're still not back to where we were in 2008. So the Great Recession definitely made some significant changes in our economy. Part of this is due to a change in how we spend. Our total, we have personal income, a portion of that is used on taxable purchases, so that's the tax base. And as you can see that, and this only goes to 2020 here in this graph, they don't have the data forward. If you were to look at it a couple of years from now when they have that, you'll see a spike up, because with the recession, we shifted a lot, or shifted away from services purchases and went more towards buying tangible goods, which are taxable as opposed to services. So you'll see a little spike up, but what we expect is that that's going to be a temporary change. You can see we have a better estimate for it nationally. You can see that and Pima County is not unique. We as a nation are shifting from purchasing goods to purchasing services, and a lot of that's driven by healthcare. So what we'll see, or what we see here, is just to the left of the vertical bar on 2021 is where we were pre-recession. Then with the recession and our inability to go out and go to a restaurant or purchase services, a lot of deferred healthcare decisions, we saw a lot of that money turned into purchases of goods. And we've seen that actually remain fairly strong. If you were to look at last year's presentation on this very same graph, you would have seen a spike. Here you can see that with an additional year of data, we've actually seen some decline in the purchase of goods, but it hasn't been as precipitous as we thought. So we continue to be purchasing product, and I think that's why we continue to see some of the challenges from a price standpoint, is there's continuing demand. This is a graph showing what they believe Pima County's income growth will look like, and this is aggregate. If you were to look at last year's growth, the same graph from last year, you would have actually seen in the near term, the next 2 years, actually going negative. In this particular case, we're staying positive and about 2% growth in income. And I believe that's largely driven by the fact that we're continuing to see raises in labor costs. But it does hold. Let me back up to one here. Sorry, I moved on too quickly. We are looking at a sustained growth in the long term of about 4.5%, and that's up from 4%, which was what was projected in last year's forecast. And this is in nominal dollars, so there will be inflation that will need to offset that in terms of the real growth. In terms of our future revenue projection, this is the baseline in nominal dollars. We're looking at, in fact, this past year, we collected $110.3 million. That was fiscal 22 revenue. By fiscal 52, 30 years out, we'll be looking at that growing to approximately $280 million. So it's going to be a continuing rise. Again, it's informed by, to a large extent, inflation, but also the growth within the region, and that's on the nominal forecast. This shows you the growth and projected yield for the RTA in nominal dollars, based on the increase in our revenue, the impact of inflation, and the shift. Again, we're going to be shifting back to more services from the significant amount of goods that have been purchased in the recession or the pandemic years. We'll be looking at it being approximately 3% on the long-term rate. And that's again in nominal dollars. Look, when we look at that and we compare that to a baseline and compare the baseline to an optimistic and a pessimistic forecast, you can see that in the optimistic, we're looking at instead of that $280 million more or less number, we'd be looking at something in the $320 million range by 2052. You have the dotted line below that represents the pessimistic forecast, and you'll note that it does cross over the baseline. That is due to the presumption that there'll be a higher inflation rate in the pessimistic forecast. So even though the actual dollars may come in higher, it's going to be driven by inflation. Looking at this basically deflated down to 2024 dollars, you can see the three forecasts, the baseline effectively being in 2052 about $148 million, whereas you have a much better optimistic and a pessimistic that basically is flatline. So we would see essentially no growth in our purchasing power if under the pessimistic forecast. We view these as valuable estimating tools, but they're just that, tools. It's a window into what we think the future might hold for us. The current new baseline forecast for the current RTA has grown by about $60 million, added to the revenue that we were looking at just a year ago. And that's now informed, that's informing our current forecasts. We're looking at it going up from 1.68 billion, which was our baseline a year ago, to 1.74 billion in nominal dollars, as opposed to the 2.1 in 2006 dollars. So there's still that enormous gap between what we thought we would collect and what we're actually going to be seeing in terms of collections for the RTA during the 20-year period of its existence. If we're looking at an RTA next forecast, one of the things that I think we need to give more credence to is the pessimistic forecast. I know when we did the 2006 plan, we opted with basically the baseline forecast, and that was what we used to develop the plan in 2006 dollars. It was based on a fairly aggressive growth rate, again, that almost 2.5% growth in population. Current forecast, if we're looking at 0.8% annual growth in our population, there's going with a pessimistic forecast, or even the baseline forecast, represents less risk, because the difference in the potential growth in the region is less. So, but with that said, we're still going to be recommending using the pessimistic forecast at $2.3 billion if we were to extend a 0.5-cent rate beyond the current termination of the RTA plan. We've identified it at $2.3 billion from fiscal year 26 to 45. That's a 1-year overlap with the current plan. It would grow slightly if we were to look at a plan that started a year later with the end of the current RTA. And with that, I just want to remind you that all revenue projections are subject to change. And I have to admit, the quote I poached from George Larson when he had his celebration of his time in business last year. So I thought that was particularly fitting.
Thank you, Jim. Really appreciate the very thorough and robust presentation. Is there a reason we don't get these ahead of time in terms of the presentation? At least I hadn't seen some of this, and reading through the 80 pages of our report, the rest of this provides perspective that would be helpful up front if we could get this as a part of the material. I think I've talked about that before. that would be really helpful.
Yeah, we'll do our best to do that. As you know, typically the presentations are prepared once the packet is done for the meeting. But we'll do our best to get out what we can ahead of time. It's mostly his talking points, so we'll do our best.
I would say there's more than talking points in here though, because I think that it provides context of the U of A report in a way that is relevant to some of the things that we're talking about. And given that we delayed this meeting at least 3 weeks, this was probably done 3 weeks ago. So my suggestion would be for us as a committee to get this ahead of time would be helpful, so that we can at least thumb through it. And, anyway, questions, thoughts, comments? Carmine, you're up.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Jim, you'd mentioned the PopTech committee and the resources that go into those population forecasts. I'd like to understand who we're relying on in doing that. And the reason I ask is because we're finding ourselves ill-equipped at a staffing level to really look at those inputs and give meaningful feedback into the process at that subcommittee level. So, we had our team reach out to leadership in the county and say, do we have anyone in the county who is skilled in this part of population forecasting? And we really don't. And that, is unfortunate. And I think it's just a trend of losing some historical resources within the county structure. But what are we relying on, or what's the primary source of those forecasting estimates?
These forecast estimates actually come down to us through the Arizona Department of Administration. So they're statewide forecasts that we're pretty much obligated to use in our transportation plan. Yeah, I wish I could give you more clarity or a more insightful answer to that, but yeah, that's where that's their origin.
So if I may add to that, so obviously at the state level, there's a committee that does that, and then they provide that information to us. We have a committee locally with all of the entities involved. They have an opportunity to review and comment. So there's a back and forth between our committee and their committee before they finalize their numbers.
And I think the process and that exists for us to look at it and provide feedback. We're having a tough time giving feedback based on any real expertise in this area. And maybe others are, I don't know.
I think
used to have gentlemen at the city whose primary focus was on population. Dave Taylor, that's right. He was with
Us for a while. Yeah.
for a while. So that type of resource, I don't believe exists, or at least I'm not aware of it in the region.
So I guess there's a couple pieces. We should think and focus on that expertise or acquiring it somehow. But also it's part of it are the assumptions and the materials, right? So that we have that information and then we can, study it, look through it, but also talk to others that are in our realms that we might be able to gather some information to help us. Because you're right, and you shouldn't have to do it alone. Quite frankly, we should all be looking at developing as accurate, given that last statement, as accurate as possible forecast, because we don't know, and we're all trying to do the right thing there. So that's part of the reason for the materials, but also the expertise to look at those materials and then be able to.
Mr. Chair, thank you. 2 questions. One is, do we understand what our growth projections are versus the entire state? Are we falling behind? Because we have very modest growth projections, but it seems that Arizona's booming. So where are we from a statewide perspective?
We are considerably reduced in our growth compared to the Phoenix metropolitan area.
Okay.
I've not looked at statewide, and I've not spent anything other than casual observation looking at the Phoenix metro area growth statistics, but clearly they are growing at a much greater rate percentage-wise than we are.
And the basis of that question really is, when does Phoenix hit that kind of unsustainable growth size And when does that growth start coming to the Tucson region? And I don't know if that's a worthwhile understanding for future projections, particularly with the RTA next. And that gets into the second part of my question, which is that we're looking at the RTA next. We're looking at an expenditure versus revenue perspective. And I'm just wondering how we work it with the growth projections. So we tried to cull down, when we had our workshop, cull down the number of projects that we had. I know Oro Valley we took many off of our list. I know everybody took many off of each list. And just looking at kind of the 50,000 foot level, if we understand that maybe there's a third parameter that's not based solely on revenue and expenditure, but population growth, and if there's some factor to put in, maybe we don't need to spend 2 billion. Maybe we need to spend 1.8 billion. Just looking at that, if they're coming, how much worse is that congestion going to get? I don't know if I'm kind of articulating that correctly. To again, right size the RTA next.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mr. Kiesler, I don't know that we've got a great answer for that. What I know, as we've been looking at it internally, we're preferring the more conservative number for forecast. We hope it's better. If we can reduce our risk by going with a more conservative forecast, and then if we over or outperform that, then we have an opportunity to, the board would have an opportunity to program additional projects with that found funding. I think that's probably the most prudent thing that we can do at this point. I don't know that I understood your question completely or not, but
sort of. It's more. I think it's more rhetorical too, throwing it out there for us just to consider as we move to the RTA next. That we have a problem, and that is that we have more than we have. We have more wants than we have money to pay for it. Re-understanding what the costs of these projects are based upon current construction trends, I think we're going to find we have a whole lot less when we do that analysis. And then, but does it really need to be? Even though we have less people, we have less revenue. Do we have less needs? And is the RTA next kind of catching up on congestion, or is it not only catching up but also helping for that future projection? And if we project too high, it inflates our needs, I guess is where I'm going on that. I'm looking for that balance.
Jim, maybe we can go back to the early slide. We had the two slopes, one slope for the projected.
The population one. Whoops, I think I went the wrong way here. Sorry.
Right there, that one.
This one.
So you said that the pre-recession growth was 2.5%.
Yes.
Population growth. And you said what the post-recession growth was, and I didn't hear it. I wanted
Roughly 0.8%.
0.8. Yeah. So
roughly a
when
third
you-
of what it was pre.
I'm sorry.
About a third of what it was
Okay.
pre-recession.
So what I'm curious, and it kind of goes back to what Paul's talking about, but what's around in my head is this is population. And then you said that like 300,000 people didn't show up.
Right.
What's the correlation? What are the projections in real dollars in comparison to this? I'm just curious as to how the population tracks with this, not the growth, but the population tracks with the sales tax. And is the projection for the sales tax that 0.8% as well going forward? Is it tracking? Is it linear in terms of the relationship? That's what I'm curious.
Yeah, it does track with the well, there are three big influencers. There's population, there is the disposable income, and then there's that was associated with that population, and then there's the trend of shifting from buying goods and services to buying, or from buying goods to buying services. And that's probably the goods to services is probably the most insidious of those, in that it's shifting who we are, and it's a change in habits, and it really begs a relooking at how we fund things. Just as we're looking at changes from fuel sources, we also have to look at how we fund things, what our tax bases are and how they're changing over time.
Dr. Lewis.
Thank you. First of all, I think I can answer your question fairly directly, Mike,
Okay.
about the correlation. I've looked at this over the years, both as just out of my own initiative and also as a paid consultant to PAG and the RTA back in the day. And there is a very strong correlation between population throughout the region, and particularly within the and the sales tax revenue. It is pretty much, it's a little variation, of course. And the sales tax per capita varies fairly significantly between the municipalities. So Oro Valley and Marana get a little bit more, obviously, than South Tucson and even Ravens. That said, if you'll bear with me,
Please.
bear with me, I do have a written statement that I want to read into the record. And my reason for doing that is exclusively to save time of this committee.
Okay.
So, and Jim, I think this will agree that some of what I'm saying is 100% consistent with what we're saying as well. Anyhow, let me read this. Take about 5 minutes. Take a break if you want. The Eller revenue forecast update is a good start toward providing the RTA board with some indication of possible revenues for RTA next. It also clearly documents the great uncertainty in such long-range forecasts in times of economic instability. And most importantly, it demonstrates the need for additional opinions from other economists. Regarding the Eller forecast, I was put off immediately by the second sentence of the report, which states, quote, the original enabling legislation allowed counties to develop a referendum that, if passed, would impose a sales tax rate on taxable sales categories at 10% of the Arizona state sales tax rate. That's 0.5%. This certainly is true for RTA 1, but the enabling legislation codified in 2019 under House Bill 2109 has since changed the limit to a full 1%. This needs to be made very clear to the RTA board. They have options on the transaction privilege tax rate. Indeed, the rate does not even need to be static throughout the entire planning period. For instance, it could start at 0.5%, shift to 0.75%, and then drop back down to 0.25%, or any pattern within the 0 to 1% over the 20-year period. Eller's forecast period of 2023 to 2052 does not align with a likely performance period for RTA Next, which would be no later than July 2026 through June of 2046. Modifying the Eller forecast to align with an RTA planning period should only be done by Eller. If staff does such modification, it should be called something than an Eller forecast, such as RTA staff forecast derived from Eller. The need for additional revenue forecasts was discussed at previous TMC meetings. However, like many other TMC discussions, the message was not carried forward to the RTA board by staff. As was previously pointed out, none of us would obtain just one estimate to remodel our kitchen. So why would we even consider basing a multi-billion-dollar plan on a single revenue forecast? PDOT Financial Management Services has a very robust revenue forecasting strategy that utilizes a panel of experts. FMS has already offered to assist the RTA with such an additional forecast. To protect the RTA board, as well as the member jurisdictions and the public, I, for one, feel it's paramount to take them up on this offer before the RTA board makes any decision regarding a revenue forecast, or better yet, a range of revenues to be considered in the RTA next planning process. As many of you know, Curtis Lewick and Associates was retained by PAG to prepare a revenue forecast for the original RTA plan during its ramp up. This was produced for PAG's Financial Planning Committee. Our forecast was about 1.75 billion for the 2006-2026 period. PAG decided then to obtain a second opinion and retained Eller, whose forecast was the 2.1 billion, all in 2006 dollars. PAG decided to go with a higher forecast. Using the same proprietary CLA model, I granted 2023 performance period in the Eller report. Results show 4.67 billion versus Eller's 5.60 billion, all in the 2023-2024 dollars. This is a $1 billion difference over the 30-year period. When looking at only the 20-year period for RTA Next, Eller's forecast interpolated by me is about 3.5 billion compared with my forecast of about 3 billion in 2023 dollars. When converted back to the 2006 dollars that we're familiar with in the plan, just for comparison's sake, Eller's forecast interpolated by me is about 2.55 billion and CLA's is 2.25 billion. This is a difference of about 300 million, again in 2006 dollars, or 400 million in 2023 dollars, which is twice the current revenue shortfall under RTA 1. The point simply being, the adopted revenue forecast can make a huge and significant difference in the success or failure of RTA Next, just as it did in RTA 1. And although I'm advocating strongly for additional professional opinions on RTA Next revenue forecast, please don't consider this discussion here as an alternative forecast. It's presented today for discussion purposes only and to help make my point. Now, this agenda item is listed as presentation only and not an action item. Accordingly, I'm strongly recommending that my comments and suggestions be provided verbatim to the RTA board at or prior to the forthcoming meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Luke. Other comments or questions from the group? Comments or questions from the group? Okay, hearing none, we'll keep moving to item 4, which is the approach for completion, of remaining RTA projects. Again, Mr. DeGrood.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the RTA board. As you know, we've been looking at what it's going to take to wrap up the remaining projects in the RTA plan. We've gone through a series of cost estimate exercises and reviewed the costs with our jurisdictional partners on the remaining projects. I know we had provided a table of those costs to you and have consistently, and there's an updated table in the that looks like so in the RTA board packet that will be available or is currently available online. We did, however, we've had a number of actions that have taken place recently. First, in June, the RTA board delayed 2 projects. The RTA number 5 Silver Bell Stage 3 project, about a $78 million project as contemplated in as a 3-lane cross section, understanding that there's a desire to potentially change the scope of that project. Similarly, RTA 13, First Avenue, Orange Grove to Ina Road, that at a 4-lane roadway configuration as originally scoped in the plan. Pima County staff had given us a March estimate of about $11 million for that. Those 2 projects have been delayed and they have been removed from the cost estimating exercise. At its October 18th meeting, the Tucson Mayor and Council recommended delay 2 additional projects. One is RTA 19, Stage 3 of 22nd Street. That's the portion between Keno intersection and Interstate 10. And the RTA 32 Houghton Road project, Stage 8, which is basically taking Houghton Road north of Broadway Boulevard to Tankerverde Road. With that discussion, there were a number of things that came out with that, including continuing dialogue, looking at a variety of different things. But for the time being, we're looking at those projects being delayed for the purposes of identifying additional resources to fund those projects. Where we stand with the projects that have not been delayed or deferred.
is a remaining cost estimate in current year dollars of $736 million. We estimate that there's $33.25 million basically of utility reimbursements that we can anticipate to offset part of that cost. So we have an adjusted total cost of a little over $700 million. Now, what we want to do, and we know that in the past, we've talked about here's the funding, here's what's available, and here's the gap. Well, we have had questions about, well, how'd you get there? And so what we are presenting you today is, all of our projected resources. Again, this is also in the RTA board packet. We're showing a baseline, pessimistic, and optimistic using the new forecast from Eller. And we are preferring to go with the pessimistic in terms of our discussion at this point, because we know we are seriously looking at the potential for a recession. And if there is no recession, we're probably looking at continuing inflation. So we're at this point in time talking in terms of a pessimistic forecast for nominal dollars and 2022 construction costs. So comparing that $702 million project costs, we've got basically $957.5 million of revenues that we believe we can rely on. It includes money that's cash on hand. It includes, miscellaneous, which is basically interest on the money that we're holding. There are a variety of other sources of funds that are available. I know we had an earlier conversation about 12.6 with the PAG meeting. What we're showing is 12.6 funds that are programmed, and then there are funds that are unprogrammed, both in terms of the TIP, which did not fully program all of the 12.6 in the 24 to 20 or 22 to 26 TIP, as well as those new funds that have been realized that exceeded our initial estimate. When we're looking at that unprogrammed number, you'll see a fairly large range between the baseline and the pessimistic. That is due to the fact that for the $12.6, we're using the TIP estimate of revenue in the pessimistic, which is, call it the beginning of the pandemic estimate from ADOT, where they looked at a substantial cutback of the 12.6, fearing a greater negative impact on gasoline sales and HERF revenues. So anyway, again, $957.5 million is what we believe we will collect from all of the various sources of funding that can be applied to the RTA program. Now, the roadway element is not the only thing that we are spending money on. We have, the cost to complete, which we've identified, those projects that are not delayed or deferred, $702 million. We also have remaining projects in the safety categorical. Most of those are interestingly in the city of South Tucson, where we've got a couple of intersection projects that have been on the books for police. We have the economic and environmental vitality element, which does include some wildlife projects, as well as some bike ped funding that is still out there to the tune of almost 13 million. Transit's the big number, $132 million. That will continue our transit at our current levels through the end of the RTA, and it takes into consideration roughly a 20% jump in costs that we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic. Labor, and try to buy a vehicle now. Our transit vehicles are about 40% more expensive than they were 2 years ago. So if you can get them. So in fact, we're looking at substantial delays in vehicle delivery at this point. And then debt service, that will complete the payment series on the series 2013 and 2017 bonds. The 2011 bonds were already paid off. We have administration expenses.
The administration expenses may look a little high. What's in there is in addition to the 1% that we're allowed to spend on planning, we also have the costs of audits. We have the costs of an election, which is placed at $2 million. So that's in there as well. So those are the big drivers on the administrative costs. So bottom line, we're looking at, if we look at the pessimistic outlook, we're still looking at about a almost $21 million shortfall, but we think this is manageable. And we are moving forward based upon this estimate at this time. It does not include, as I mentioned, the cost of those 4 projects that are delayed or deferred, and it is on the pessimistic forecast. Both the baseline and optimistic forecasts assume a more favorable budget, but we don't have any way to really reasonably estimate the impacts of inflation. If we were to go to the federal recommendation for what we're supposed to put in the tip, it's a very modest inflation rate. It's only 2 or 3%. And what we've experienced over the past few years is not comparable to that. So, that's going to be really something we'll have to deal with as time progresses. So, what our recommendation is that we continue to provide case-by-case funding as projects are ready for construction bidding. We provide those to the board incrementally as we're approving IGAs. That the board further considers the delaying of programming of the regional funds for fiscal 27 and 28 for non-RTA regional projects in the event they're needed to complete the 2006 plan projects. We ask that all partners continue to pursue alternative funding sources. We know that there have been federal funding opportunities that the city of Tucson has taken advantage of, and we're very grateful for that. And that we use the RTA Next as a supplemental funding tool to cover any needed costs for unfinished projects within the 2006 plan. In summary, revenues are in nominal dollars. Expenses are in 2022 dollars. Again, inflation, we don't know where we're going with that. We're going to see that as it comes. RTA Next revenues will be needed to complete all the projects unless other funds are made available, and the actual construction costs may increase and are unknown and influenced by a variety of different things, not the least of which are related to demand in the construction industry and influenced by oil and availability and certainly labor. And with that, that completes my presentation.
Thank you, Jim. I have a question for the committee. Maybe you can just help me. I would find it helpful to get this information ahead of time. Is it just me, or, I mean, I don't want to be, if I'm the only one, then I'm done. But if you would agree, then I would say to you, we really need this information, because I think it helps us. It's hard to come in and be expected to even comment. I mean, we don't all just sit here and I assume ask questions on what we see, but without getting it ahead of time, I really think there could be a lot of value for the conversation on that. So I wanted to just take a minute and talk about that piece of it, because I think it's important for us to be able to weigh in on this stuff without having that material. I think it makes it kind of hard. Go ahead, Dr. Wood. Go ahead, Tracy.
Sure. I agree with you 100% on that. I've commented several times that overwhelmed is a move, and the skill and knowledge and expertise that's here. And certainly RTA could benefit by getting these horses a little sweaty once in a while. And that frankly just isn't happening. We've got, what did I calculate, $2,000 an hour of consulting fees that are sitting here. Between particularly on the non-jurisdictional number. And frankly, we're doing very little, and we could be doing a lot. I know Mr. Bernal, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Carroll are all willing to use our professional skills and abilities and our knowledge of this community to really help And we want to do it, quite frankly. I really wonder, while on one hand, we're giving directions not to talk with each other outside of the context of these meetings. And then when we are here, we're not utilized, and the discussions that we have don't go anyplace. Essentially, we're ignored. So, I think there's stumbling onto something in the future, and hopefully we can rectify that as part of the process.
Okay. So I think that's some feedback for you that we would like to have the materials ahead of time, recognizing that we all prepare a package for our boards and our councils, and even if they have to tweak a little bit because of later information or up-to-date information, I think that's fine, but I think it is important for us to get that ahead of time. Mr. Mulgee.
So related to this item, as you all know, we've been discussing this for almost a year and a half, and I thank everybody for being involved, being engaged. So really the only update for today was the 2 projects that were recommended by the city, and the RTA board has been very active and involved in obtaining that input. So other than just that update, obviously we want to make sure that everybody knew that we're all on the same page when it comes to the cost estimates. And really the only recommendation at this point that we're looking for this committee to make or potentially discuss is this approach, the approach that everybody agrees is the right approach. Other than that, really the update was provided based on the packet material that the cost estimates have been updated recently. So we'll be happy again to provide information as much as possible ahead of time. But there was nothing else new other than just the action that the city recommended for delaying 2 projects.
I've got Paul and Shane. I see your hand up, so we'll start with Paul and then we'll go to Shane. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really kind of 3 parts to my statement question. One is on timing. So I saw we're doing an analysis with regard to funding. Timing is also a big issue on this, because if you look at the time the DCR takes, then the time the design takes, the time procurement takes, and the time to construct, that could be 3 to 4 years. We have 3.5 years left in the RTA as it stands right now. And that's without whether the board votes for it to extend into 27, 28. But if a project hasn't started now, it may not have a ghost of a chance to finish by the end. And if the board votes to have the PAG funding to supplement the RTA, is there enough PAG funding for all of those trailing projects? If you take the half cent off, is there still enough cash on that piece? And then lastly, just for a revenue band-aid, should we consider suggesting that fares being reinstated for transit? Because right now everyone rides for free. And I know it's not a lot, but at this point right now, I think everything helps. Thank you.
Jim, do you want to address the question about the second question you had was I think probably more specific to what happens if RTA next doesn't pass?
Exactly.
Have you run scenarios like that?
I have run some scenarios. We're looking at roughly between $40 and $50 million a year between the RTA, between the 12.6 and the STBG. That if the board were to choose to fund the remaining projects at their current ballot level and meet the needs, we're probably talking another 5 years of regional funds to make up the entirety of the short, just using the regional funds. But that's a decision that we're not going to presuppose.
So let me push back just. I'll come to you in a minute. So this is interesting. The analysis does include your analysis, which you're not necessarily sharing, does include some assumptions that if RTA next does not happen, how the 2006 RTA would be delivered. That's sort of a question, I guess. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what I would say, Mr. Chair, is that we haven't been given direction to look in that fashion. However, we as staff are always looking at how we might try to solve these types of challenges. Clearly, what we're hearing is that the preferred way to deal with this would be to deal with the scope changes that are desired by the jurisdictions incorporated into an RTA next package.
But in the event it doesn't go forward, what do? And, you know, the logical alternative, if we are to finish these projects out, would be to use other regional funds. If we don't have direction to change the ballot or the scopes, particularly in the expansion side, if we don't have that direction, then we would look to fund to the scope that's in the RTA plan. So in the case of those 4 projects that are deferred, you know, after subtracting out the 5% for utilities, now we're coming up at about $200 million. So $200 million plus a $20 million gap, $220 million. And you know, that's the difference between the resources that we've got available and the costs that, you know, under the pessimistic forecast, between what we've got that we expect to receive between now and 2026 and those costs. So that would be the gap. And how would we solve it? If we're collecting between $40 and $50 million a year combined to STVG and 12.6, the numbers were pretty straightforward.
Jimmy, don't want to go down Paul's rabbit hole here, but I think there's some good info there. You mentioned 2 things though. One is the ballot amount. That language always makes me nervous now because it's delivery of the program that is scoped by the program first. That's first thing. And then the second one you mentioned potential scope change, but I thought that there was concern about scope changes that could run us afoul of the language that was scoped in the 2006 ballot.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I apologize if I mentioned ballot amount because that was not my intention.
That's why.
Pardon me?
It's probably ingrained in you.
It may very well be, but what I meant to speak is the current anticipated cost based upon estimates that we've received from the jurisdictions, or we've developed and added an inflation factor to from our 2019 RMAP. We did have a formal exercise where we did some cost estimating, and for those projects that haven't begun, we basically took those estimates and expanded them with an inflation factor. So that's how we got to that.
And the scope change.
The scope, we've not anticipated any scope changes in the cost estimate of that $200 million figure that I gave to you. That would be a 3-lane Silverbell North. It would be, you know, as scoped on 22nd Street, Tankerverde and First Avenue. So per the ballot. And
Just to add to that, we talked about it earlier. So fiscal year 27, 28, those 2 fiscal years, we're asking the board to hold off and make a decision on those 2.
Right.
So the same thing would apply to future years as well.
Okay, yeah, because I think Mr. DeGroot answered my question very adequately, which was I was worried about what's that time frame? How does that impact the regional funding? And when you add up everything, the 200 million plus the 20 million, that's about a 5-year spread on that impact on PAG. And that's what the basis of my question.
Good. Shane, you had a comment or question? Still there? There you are.
Mr. Chair, thanks. I didn't want to detract from the where we started heading with some of the comments and discussion here. I was just going to play on your comments, Mike, that obviously this committee can only serve PAG and, you know, PAG staff to the extent we have information available to us. And, you know, I'm going to state the obvious, but the sooner we have information as a committee, the better our discussion is going to be when we get around the table together, Farhad, and then you're hearing from us directly because you know that we're going to be talking with our elected representatives on the regional council and giving them our advice and so anyway, hearing from us here is the better way to go for sure. And I just wanted to echo that comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Shane. Appreciate that. Other thoughts?
Yeah, yeah, Mike, just a quickie, following up on what you were saying about terminology. There's 2 pet peeves of terminology. for me. One is ballot amount. If you look at the ballot, there's not a dollar sign, there's not a percentage in it. If we're talking about what was approved by the voters, we should say the dollar amount in the approved or in the adopted plan. Saying the word ballot amount all of a sudden introduces some credibility and so on to the use or misuse of that term. So I kind of hoping we can stop saying that altogether. The other thing is that bothers me, that is a real hang up, is moving a project to RTA Next. Frankly, folks, RTA Next does not exist yet as an entity. What we have is a planning process. So if we're moving a project anyplace, we're moving it into the RTA Next planning process. And again, there's this perceived legality with ballot amount. There's this perceived certainty with using the term RTA Next. It's not fair to the voters or any other jurisdictions or even the committee members to continue to use those terms. And I wish we would just change them and use some other terminology. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Bruno.
Thanks, Mike. Just two questions. Jim, the recommendations that you listed, are those going forward or are they not? Are they just for this discussion?
Mr. Chair, we expect to give similar information. This is, as you know, the TMC is an advisory committee to the RTA board, and we would be giving basically the same information that you're seeing today to the board on Thursday.
I guess one of the recommendations that I noted talked about the non-RTA projects in 26 and 27 not being funded with the regional dollars. Are the jurisdictions already weighing in on what that means to them?
Mr. Chair, we know that there's an interest in seeing those funds made available, but that's an act that we would like to hear the regional council taking a position on, whether they're made available or whether they're held in reserve. We did begin to discuss that at the last RTA board meeting.
And Mr. Chairman, just one other item on the agenda item, it talks about the RTA board being required by state law to refer scope changes to the voters. I think we've discussed the debate with that. What's the purpose of that statement at this item?
I'm sorry, I don't.
I mean, there's a statement that says it's just kind of a reminder of the RTA board. Why?
Mr. Chair, if I may answer that. So if you recall, out of the 4 projects, one of them is a scope expansion. And we've had this conversation with the board before. And we'll continue to have that conversation, obviously prior to making a final decision. In the statute, expansions require the incremental cost to be paid by the entity that creates that additional cost. If they do not have the funding to do that, it has to go back to the voters for voter approval. So we keep referencing that to make sure that everybody understands that expansion cost increases have to be paid by non-RTA dollars.
But I thought part of the statute talks about an element and a percentage of cost exceeding that element, not an individual project.
There's a cap amount and we're tracking the cap. So
For the element.
For the total element, yes. So it's complying with the entire statute. And I believe at some point we're going to have to identify when we finish current RTA, regardless of whether it's in 24 or 25 or 26, there are going to be certain projects that are not completed. All those projects that are not completed would have to transfer into the new plan for voter approval. At that point, we would know what that amount is. That's potentially a cost increase.
Mr. Chair.
Before we leave, Mr. Bernal, John, you bring up a good point, and I actually didn't catch the thought. But I think that statement on the agenda, I think it'd be better to say is required to refer expanded scope changes, because that just implies like what the whole spring we went through on First Avenue. So this basically refers to scope changes.
It says incremental cost increases.
I understand that, but the way this wording is outlined, it is for a scope change. And I would just suggest that it be expanded scope so that it brings a little bit of clarity to, I think, John's point. Because I think in the
Sure.
future, there should be a clarity.
Sure,
there.
again, we tied back to the incremental cost. If there's an incremental cost increase, that needs to be referred back.
I think it'd be better to have it explicit.
Yeah.
If we're gonna reference this
Sure.
and include the information, I think there would be value in that.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to add, we seem to be keeping Mr. Benavides quite busy lately. So perhaps he could take a look at this terminology and identify some wording that could be used that's consistent with statutes and not 2 pages of legal gobbledygook. So I think this, the sentence basically needs to be clarified, Mr. Chair, as you had indicated. And it would be good for Mr. Benavides to weigh in on that.
Okay, so noted. And I would look for any other comments on this topic. This item is listed for a possible recommendation. I've heard a lot of good discussion here, up to and including recommending what is presented, which we just saw today. But also the conversation around what happens if RTA Next is not approved by the voters. My suggestion would be that we start at least talking about that as what does it look like going forward. So I would entertain a motion to move the recommendation for the projects as outlined. And in addition, at least start the analysis of what happens if RTA Next does not pass.
So moved.
A motion by Ms. Lesher, a second.
Second.
By Sam. Further discussion on that. So just to be clear, we would move the recommendation that's here with an added suggestion or recommendation that we start the process now of if RTA Next is not successful, what does delivery of the program look like? And I think that starts to bring specificity to that $220 million that Jim outlined in his presentation. Further discussion, comments? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. No abstentions this time? No abstentions?
No.
I was just checking.
No abstention. I'm tuned in completely.
All right, let's keep moving here. Update on the RTA Next development plan process. Bucky, I assume, is online. Oh, there she is. Hey, Bucky.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board of the committee. Well, assuming that there will be an RTA Next plan, I would like to give you a quick update on our RTA.
We all hope that as well.
Yes, me too. So this is information since the TMC workshop. And I just, again, wanted to thank all of you for participating and for all the teamwork of the workshop on the 22nd. So the refinement process that occurred consisted of recommendations that you all provided further prioritize the projects that were originally submitted. So as you all know, at the workshop, it resulted in a recommended list of projects worth approximately $1.9 billion. I understand, with the discussions that you've had today, these costs and maybe revised and changed, but is that you were able to refine the original list of $4.6 billion. So for that reason, we felt that the workshop was very successful. At this point, we're looking at a reasonable target for the named projects in this next round of the process to be completed by the CAC at about $1.1 billion. The project scope and the cost estimates for these final refined project list will be reviewed and then updated later in the process. We understand we've had some additions, deletions. I know there were extensions. So all that I would ask is if you do have any additional revisions to your refined list, if you could get those to us by mid-November, I think that would really help us move with the process. So in terms of CAC activities, just wanted to pick up on that. We've been having 2 CAC meetings a month. At the October 3rd full CAC meeting, the CAC had received the updated information that was received from the TMC workshop. They've been given a demonstration of the database and have started to review the projects and been given homework assignments and those sorts of things. We also created a project tool evaluation working group. This working group has been, just looking at evaluation frameworks, ideas, regional policies. The purpose of this is to look at how to best refine the list. So they met on October 5th, and I had asked all of you to please designate representatives. So they had great representation from the jurisdictions, and they've been attending and provided input as needed. So we appreciate that teamwork. And then the second meeting of the month, which was the last meeting the CAC had, we had member jurisdictions and designated representatives come and discuss their RTA submitted priority projects. ADOT, the city of Tucson, the town of Marana, and the town of Sahuarita all attended. They gave great information, clarified anything for the CAC, and provided any updated information. So that was really helpful. And then last week we had our third and hopefully final tool evaluation working group. They continued the discussion, and the working group came down to a tool that will be added to the whole CAC at their November 7th meeting. And again, thank you for the representation from the jurisdictions at these meetings. So the next meeting is next Monday on the 7th. We have additional jurisdictions presenting at that meeting. Thank you to those of you who have confirmed to meet next Monday with the CAC. And then hopefully the CAC will start drafting a recommended list of named corridor projects, which we will then provide back to you, the TMC, to review and provide us your feedback, and then start that iterative process that we've been doing back and forth. Then the second meeting of the month for the CAC will be the 21st. By then, I'll have gotten you the information. You'll have provided it back, and the CAC will review your feedback and then provide a final list of named corridor projects for the RTA board's review. Even though the RTA board is meeting this week, at their December 8th meeting is when we anticipate that they'll review and provide direction on the list of named projects. So that's just my quick nutshell recap of activities. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, I appreciate all of your teamwork and cooperation.
Thank you, Paki. I see one of the co-chairs, Tom McGovern for the CAC. Tom, do you have any comments or questions at this point?
No, not really, Mike. I think Paki pretty much covered where we're at. The process of evaluating all of the projects by the committee is ongoing, I guess, and having now some specific rating methods, I guess, is going to be helpful for us to establish priorities and try to cut that list nearly in half, as we were talking about. So I'm hopeful that that extra amount of input that we've received, and we'll also receive at our next meeting from the jurisdictions, will really solidify the committee's understanding of how the individual jurisdictions have prioritized their own projects, and then we can somehow shuffle them together.
Tom, is Carolyn on? Do you know, or does anybody know if Carolyn's on? Anybody?
She is.
Carolyn, did you have any comments?
Nope, just to know what Chairman McGovern said. So thank you. I think we're working as fast as we can. I'm not sure if we can work fast enough, but we'll do our best.
One other point might be that our transit subcommittee is scheduling its kind of next meeting, if you will, And we've added a couple of new members to that committee, and we'll be receiving input from jurisdictions, particularly Suntran and others who have transit projects. While we're also as a committee looking at some of the major corridor type projects that have been submitted that would fall under the transit category.
Good, thank you, Tom. A couple of questions. Paki, I think the date you had was December 8th for recommendation or establishment of the named project list for the RTA board. What are the next steps after that?
Once the board the list, then at the beginning of the year, the CAC will continue to go through the refinement process, and then also start looking at the elements or the categoricals. And then we plan to have the public outreach process in the summer. I believe I'm trying to remember the milestones I laid out. This summer of next year, go through the extensive public outreach process. And no, excuse me, July 1st is when the list is due. Sorry. July 1st is when the final list is due. So the spring will be that final refinement from the CAC, looking at the categoricals and looking at all of the projects.
So the December 8th conversation with the board is messaging the project list, but it's refined by the end of the fiscal year. So it would be like July 1. It's finalized. That's, I assume, an iterative process. Tom, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to note that after the first of the year, there'll be extensive work by the RTA and jurisdictions in refining those cost estimates. So that's a big part, as you know, and as you've been talking about, of exactly how many projects we can actually list. So projects that may be coming from RTA 1, that are being held over for RTA next, as well as the projects on our list, need to have those now pretty outdated, particularly in terms of inflation, cost estimates updated, and that's a big part of our refinement process as well.
Very good, Tom. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Rod, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have something I'd like to address, and I spoke with Paki about this earlier on two of the projects listed, project 2543 Park Avenue and 2544 6th Avenue. They're listed on the ADOT section. They're listed under here as removed from consideration, and they are not in terms of ADOT being removed from consideration. They're kind of in the first 2 years out there. So I just want to clarify that. And is that presented the right way, Poppy? How are we doing with that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Rod. Yeah, Rod and I discussed that ADOT did not want those projects to move forward as being. So what we're doing is, again, any jurisdictions that have any revisions to the TMC that we have provided, those will be updated. We just want to do it all at once rather than changing the document. So yes, that's a good example that Rod gave, is any of those things that need to be removed or added. Again, there were a lot of extensions discussed at the TMC workshop, so those costs need to also be reflected. All of that will be provided later, all at once, rather than doing it, in a mixed bag.
Good, Rod.
Thank you, Poppy. And I specifically want to talk about 6th Avenue. ADOT's got its project plans for 6th Avenue, but I think 6th Avenue is designated as a potential transit corridor. So I think regionally that conversation has to happen at some point. And I anticipate, whatever the city might need for that to be possibly included in this project. So I just want to make sure that those two are pointed out. They're both urban sections that need to be considered. Thank you.
So just thinking through that for a minute, two pieces, right? The project specific, I think should be analyzed and maybe talk through in more detail to figure out how and where that's included in the future. But Bucky, you mentioned the tweaks to the list. At what point does the TMC get a chance to weigh in on that list again?
We're hoping, so at the next CAC meeting on the 7th, which is also after the RTA board meeting on the 3rd,
right,
that we can get information back to TMC to start tweaking and provide something so that by the November 21st date, he has a much better idea of what they're looking at to finalize that list. So November, obviously this month, by end of this month.
So if I may add to that, so that'll be mostly through Rick and Pocky and his team working with your staff, providing additional clarifications and details. It's really project cleanup. So they've been doing that. So they'll reach out and then, similar to what ADOT just mentioned, make those corrections. So when we get back to the CAC again, we can provide those corrections to the CAC.
When is the next TMC meeting?
Next TMC meeting, you all decided that you wanted to meet second Wednesday of every month at 9 o'clock. So if you still plan to meet, that'll be in less than a week and a half, 10 days.
So the next TMC meeting is between the 7th and the 21st, correct?
Correct.
So at that point, I would suggest that the TMC could weigh in on that tweaked list. My nervousness is, went through all the gyrations with the team, right? And came up with recommendations. And if there's tweaks, which by the way, makes sense. And I'm thinking of some that we probably going to want to bring forward. I think it would be good for the entirety of the group to look at that in time for the 21st is my gut. So I would suggest, Bucky, if that works for you, whatever that Wednesday is, be the 16th.
The 9th.
The 9th.
Is it the second Wednesday? Yeah.
That's not, okay. So the 9th, would that give you enough time? You suggested or stated that the meeting's on the 7th with CAC. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Will you have the updated list for the 9th? Think it'll be ready by then?
I will try really hard to, get that coordination going between all of us and see if we can get something by the.
Fair enough.
If I may clarify, I'm not sure if there's going to be a list coming from the CAC. There'll be additional questions for clarification.
Whatever it looks like. I mean, it sounds to me like there might be projects that are tweaked, removed, added, expanded. I think that's the conversation. You call it whatever you want, but it's that different, that potential different conversation.
I think, and as I just mentioned, it'll probably be handled by email ahead of time with your staff. So hopefully they connect with you as well. Are there anything that you want to make adjustments similar to what ADOT just recommended for an adjustment?
Okay.
Mr. Chair, there's also more presentations. Oro Valley is going to be presenting on the 7th. And I don't know what other jurisdictions, but there's still more information to be pulled together.
Pima County is presenting that same day.
Here's the reason it's so great. Good info. I think there's value in us talking through that on the 9th. And if we need to delay it a week, we can certainly do that. That's up to the TMC. But I'm just kind of thinking about the fact that if we really want to weigh in and do it in a positive way for the board, CAC on the 21st, ultimately with the board on the 8th of December, I think there could be value there. I'm not trying to rush it, be done by the 9th. If you think you need another week, you're still between the 21st. We could do it on that. It would be the 16th instead if everybody's schedule works for that. So just a thought, trying to make sure we provide ourselves with that opportunity to help and guide the RTA board. I think should be of value there. So thoughts, comments on that?
Mr. Chair, if I may, during my presentation, I had mentioned mid-November, but I didn't realize that your meeting was scheduled for the 9th. So my apologies for that. But yes, if the committee agrees and can extend it a week, that would be helpful.
How about thank you, Bucky, for that. How about we look at our calendars for the 16th? So the 16th, same place, same station and back. Sam?
Sure, there's a transportation planning meeting.
What time does that normally mean? Same time? Sounds to me like they might have to move. No. Well, the other thing we could do is we don't have to meet at 9, and we could shift for another time during the day. So let's just, does anyone have a conflict on the 16th that could be problematic for us?
Mr. Chair, this is Shane. I was going to suggest just that. I mean, I'm pretty open. I'm pretty open all in the AM for that day and early afternoon. So I can move some things around and be flexible.
The doctor is flexible. So
yeah, you don't hear that very often, but yes.
No scheduled surgeries.
No scheduled surgeries that day. So either we keep it at 9 thereabouts, or let's move it to the afternoon. So
He just
whatever.
said he's not available.
Oh,
in
I'm
the
sorry. Did you say
afternoon,
that?
so, yeah.
Shane, did you say?
He's available early afternoon.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah. Anyway, for the sake of discussion, if you don't mind, let's keep it at 9 o'clock on the 16th. On that, we'll adjust other things as needed.
Okay. Anything else on the RTA next development? Any other comment?
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, so we're looking at moving our meeting next week to the 16th. Is that correct?
That's correct, at 9 o'clock at this point, unless you hear otherwise. But at this point, unless there's a huge conflict, and it sounds like there might be an opportunity to move it to you.
Yeah, we'll take care of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else on that topic? There was a conversation about recommendations for the refinement. Any recommendations that need to come at this time? My gut would be no, until we, maybe on the 16th, we might be ready at that point, it's my gut. Okay, hearing no objection, we'll move on. Future agenda items. I've got 3 that I've thought about. One is, I think all items that are listed should be available for vote or recommendation. I noticed on the RTA revenue estimates that was not on the agenda for decision or recommendation. The other, so my suggestion is that all future items at least give us the opportunity to make a recommendation. So that would be one. I don't know if that's an agenda item specifically, but I would just suggest that as a change. To the September 22nd meeting summary, I think would be helpful for us to vote on and look at. I think there'd be value there. And then the third that I thought about is, and although we cover it to some level during the RTA next development, is to have a report from the CAC so that we have a standing agenda item so that Tom, Carolyn, and anyone else from the CAC, whoever's appropriate, could brief us on what they're up to, and any other opportunity for coordination. So my suggestion would be that we have a standing item there. In this particular, on this day, Tom could very easily say, I covered everything under the development process, so no need for me to report, but there might be something else that could give us an opportunity. So without objection, I would ask for that to be on future agendas. So just report from CAC. Any other items for future agenda?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would like to suggest that we have a future agenda item to discuss how the Technical Management Committee can help with the revenue forecasting. And it kind of plays along with Carmine's suggestion before. We maybe need Dave Taylor's grandchildren to come in here and help us out. But we're here to help, and I think we can certainly lend a hand in the forecasting idea and act as a buffer to the RTA board. And it's clearly within our bylaws to deal with financial matters.
So what I'm wondering is it procedural or process oriented, or can we just leave it as outlined, updated revenue estimates, but then put in a recommendation down below?
Well, I think the discussion is how can we help with the expertise that we have here on this. And I do think that we can add significantly to some policy discussions by the RTA board Maybe talking a little bit about different sales tax amounts as an option. Jim had suggested using a pessimistic forecast, which I think is a terrific suggestion. Maybe we can weigh in on that. And the obvious benefit of using a pessimistic suggestion is that it puts us in the position of under promising and over delivering versus what's happening with RTA 1, where we're doing the exact opposite and it's not good.
So without getting into the merits of that, I think the discussion is procedural more so than the
Yes.
actual estimate.
Right.
So here's my suggestion, Kurt, if you wouldn't mind, jot down what the agenda item would look like, and you can take the lead on that.
Yeah, okay.
And then get that to the staff. We'll put it on the agenda for future discussion.
That sounds like I got to work.
You do.
I'm going to stop coming up with
And you
ideas.
volunteer, so we know you used to be a consultant. Any other items for future discussion or future agenda? Being none, I will call us adjourned. Thank you very much.
Mike,
Oh,
I just have one
we're
comment.
adjourned. 11:22.
Oh, sorry. No, this is the comment really unrelated to the committee itself, but more about our past chair, Mr. Huckleberry. I get asked a lot, and I'm sure Jen does also, how is Chuck doing? The answer to your question is in a recent interview from last Sunday, Bud Foster on KOLD. So if you go out and look for that, it's a 3 or 4 minute interview and it's just excellent. And it'll give you some insights into how Chuck is recovering.
So instead of having call to the audience, we'll have call to Curtis. So thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. You're welcome. Oh, I got something else for you. Carolyn was supposed to